The howling of the toxic wind was the only companion Reese had known for 3 years. On Xylos, a desolate ice planet at the edge of colonial space, that howling never ceased, a constant reminder of his chosen exile. The chemical snowstorms that swept across the barren landscape carried particles that would sear human lungs within minutes of exposure. The perpetually overcast sky cast an eternal twilight over the mutated vegetation and predatory fauna that had evolved after the biological disaster. Reese's makeshift base was an engineering marvel born of desperation, a patchwork of salvaged mining equipment, reinforced habitat modules, and his own ingenious adaptations. He'd built it to withstand the ruthless environment, but more importantly, to withstand loneliness. The former rescue engineer and military specialist had come here for one reason: to escape responsibility, to escape connection, to escape the memories of those he had failed to save. His family, his team, their faces still appeared in his nightmares. Daily life on Xylos followed a monotonous rhythm. Each morning, if the faint brightening of the toxic clouds could be called morning, Reese checked and maintained his life support systems. He inspected the integrity of his outer walls against the corrosive atmosphere. He cultivated hardy, genetically modified plants in his small hydroponic garden. He monitored his dwindling supplies, and he did it all in silence, broken only by the mechanical whirs and hums of the equipment keeping him alive. The emotional numbness had become as much a part of him as his scarred hands. It was easier this way. No one to disappoint, no one to fail, no one to lose. On this particular day, Reese had just finished reinforcing a section of the eastern wall when his long-range sensor array pinged with an alert. He frowned. The sensors were calibrated to detect only the largest predators, the crystalline snowstalkers that occasionally prowled too close to his perimeter. But this energy signature was unlike anything in his database. It pulsed with a strange, almost artificial rhythm. And then he heard it, cutting through the endless howl of the wind, a scream. Not human, yet unmistakably intelligent. It conveyed pain, terror, and a desperate plea that transcended species barriers. Something about that cry reached past Reese's carefully constructed emotional barriers and touched something he thought long dead. He stood frozen at his console, fingers hovering over the controls. Every instinct of self-preservation told him to ignore it, to shut down the sensor, to retreat deeper into his sanctuary. Whatever was out, there was not his problem. He had come to Xylos to escape problems, to escape responsibility. But that scream, it reminded him of another scream from long ago. A child's cry for help that had come too late. "Damn it," he muttered, the sound of his own voice strange in the perpetual silence of his habitat. His internal battle lasted minutes that felt like hours. Finally, with a resigned sigh that carried years of buried guilt, he moved to his equipment locker and began suiting up. The environmental protection suit was bulky but necessary, its multiple layers designed to shield against Xylos's deadly atmosphere. He checked the seals twice, then attached his basic medical kit and technical tools to his belt. Last came the weapon, a modular pulse rifle that could be configured for different threats. He hoped he wouldn't need it, but hope was a luxury on Xylos. As the airlock cycled and the outer door hissed open, Reese stepped into the howling wasteland, following the signal that had broken 3 years of determined isolation. The terrain of Xylos seemed designed to discourage exploration. Reese trudged through fields of knife-like ice crystals that would have shredded his suit if not for its reinforced fabric. He navigated around deep crevasses in the permafrost, some concealed by thin sheets of deceptive ice. Acidic mist reduced visibility to mere meters at times, forcing him to rely on his suit's sensors rather than his eyes. Twice, he encountered Xylos's nightmarish fauna. Once a pack of skittering ice leeches that retreated when he activated his suit's electrical defense field, and later a towering crystal-spined quadruped that observed him from a distance before lumbering away, apparently deciding he wasn't worth the effort. The energy signature grew stronger, leading him to a clearing in one of the sparse crystal forests. The scene that greeted him stopped Reese in his tracks. Suspended a meter above the ground was a humanoid figure caught in what could only be described as an energy net. The creature was slender, with proportions similar to a human but distinctly alien. Its limbs longer, joints arranged differently, with an almost delicate quality despite its obvious strength. Its skin bore intricate patterns that emitted a faint bioluminescence, pulsing erratically with its distress. Where a human would have hair, this being had something like fine tendrils that shifted with colors responding to its emotions, currently flashing between deep red and alarming yellow. Its eyes were multifaceted, like those of an insect, but larger and unmistakably intelligent, reflecting a complex consciousness. The energy net itself was a marvel of technology, far beyond the dated mining equipment abandoned on Xylos. A complex web of pulsing energy filaments surrounded the creature, delivering what appeared to be calculated shocks designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Each shock caused the being to convulse and emit another of those heart-wrenching cries that it carried to Reese's sensors. As Reese approached cautiously, those multifaceted eyes locked onto him. The creature's reaction was immediate. It thrashed more violently against its constraints, causing the net to tighten and intensify its punishment. A sound emerged from what must have been its vocal apparatus, a high, warning tone that needed no translation. Stay away. Danger. Threat. It thought he was with them, whoever had set this trap. I'm not going to hurt you, Reese said, knowing the words meant nothing, but hoping his tone might convey his intentions. He held his hands up, palms forward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. I'm here to help. The creature stilled slightly, its eyes never leaving him, body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Its tendrils shifted slightly toward a deeper purple, uncertainty rather than outright fear. Reese analyzed the trap carefully. It was elegantly designed, the primary containment field linked to secondary systems that would deliver increasing shocks if tampered with. There appeared to be a silent alarm mechanism as well. Whoever had designed this wanted their prey alive and wanted to know immediately if someone interfered. His years as a rescue engineer hadn't been wasted after all. With careful movements, he unpacked a small device from his tool belt, a multi-spectrum field analyzer he'd salvaged from the abandoned mining facilities. He placed it near the trap's power node and began scanning the energy patterns. This will take a few minutes, he said, addressing the captive being with the same calm tone he'd once used with trapped miners or scared civilians. Try to stay still. I know it hurts, but movement makes it worse. The creature seemed to understand, or at least recognize the wisdom in minimizing its movements. Its breathing was labored, and Reese could see several severe energy burns where the net had made direct contact with its skin. After several tense minutes of analysis, Reese identified the trap's weak points. It required precise timing. He needed to disrupt 3 nodes simultaneously to prevent the failsafe from triggering. He rigged a series of small EMP charges, positioning them carefully around the perimeter of the trap. This might hurt for a second, he warned, but then it should stop. I hope. He triggered the charges. The net flickered, intensified briefly, causing the creature to emit another pained cry, then collapsed entirely. The alien being fell to the ground with a soft thud, limbs splayed awkwardly, tendrils now a dull gray. For a terrifying moment, Reese thought he'd miscalculated, that the surge had killed the creature. Then he saw the shallow rise and fall of its chest. Just as he moved toward the injured alien, his suit's proximity sensors blared a warning. Something was approaching, fast. In the distance, he caught the unmistakable whine of a small reconnaissance drone sweeping the area in search patterns. The creature's eyes snapped open, and it made a series of urgent, clicking sounds. One long-fingered hand pointed shakily toward the sky, then made a cutting motion across its throat. The message was clear enough. Hunters approaching. Death coming. There was no time for careful consideration. Reese scooped up the alien's lightweight form. It weighed far less than a human of similar size would have, and started back toward his base as quickly as the treacherous terrain would allow. The creature initially stiffened at his touch, but soon relaxed, perhaps recognizing that resistance would only slow them down. As they moved, Reese caught a glimpse of the drone changing course, heading directly toward the now-empty trap site. They had minutes at most before the hunters realized their prey had escaped, and that someone had helped. The journey back to the base was a nightmare of pain and fear. The alien being, whom Reese had mentally begun calling the Survivor, could barely support its own weight. Its skin burned with fever where the energy trap had made contact, and it breathed in shallow, irregular gasps. Halfway back, as they traversed a particularly exposed stretch of ice plain, the Survivor suddenly grabbed Reese's arm with surprising strength. It made an urgent hushing sound and pointed toward a ridge of crystalline formations. Reese understood instantly and pulled them both behind a large outcropping, just as another drone, larger and more heavily armed than the first, swept overhead. The Survivor's multifaceted eyes seemed to track the drone even through the solid crystal barrier, its head turning smoothly as the machine passed. Only when those eyes stopped moving did Reese dare to continue their journey. By the time they reached the base, the Survivor was barely conscious, its bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly. The airlock's decontamination cycle seemed to take an eternity. When the inner door finally opened, Reese carried the alien directly to his sleeping quarters, the only space with a surface comfortable enough for a wounded being. Treating the Survivor's wounds presented a unique challenge. Reese had no knowledge of its physiology, no idea what might help or harm. He started with the most universal treatment he knew, clean water to cool the energy burns, applied carefully to the affected areas. The Survivor flinched at first contact, but then relaxed, its tendrils shifting to a soft blue that Reese interpreted as relief. Working methodically, he cleaned each burn, noting the unusual consistency of the being's skin, smoother than human skin, with a subtle texture reminiscent of polished stone, yet flexible and clearly living. The burns themselves were already showing signs of healing, far faster than any humans would. While tending to a particularly severe burn on what approximated a shoulder, Reese noticed a series of older scars, perfectly straight, surgical in their precision. Similar marks appeared around joints and along the spine. Experimentation. Someone had treated this intelligent being as a laboratory specimen. Once the immediate injuries were addressed, Reese offered the Survivor water in a shallow bowl. After a cautious inspection, it drank eagerly, revealing another anatomical difference. A small secondary mouth part that extended from the primary one to siphon the liquid. "You're safe here," Reese said, knowing the words were meaningless but wanting to fill the silence. At least for now. The alien watched him with unblinking eyes, tendrils now cycling slowly through blues and greens. It made a tentative gesture toward Reese, then pointed to its own chest, producing a sound like wind through crystal. "Elara." "Elara." Reese repeated, testing the name. The Survivor, Elara, nodded, the motion slightly too fluid for a human neck. "Reese," he responded, pointing to himself. "RRES," Elara attempted, the sound imperfect but recognizable. This simple exchange marked the beginning of their communication. Over the next hours, as Elara's strength gradually returned, they developed a rudimentary system of gestures and sounds. Reese discovered that Elara could comprehend far more than she could express. Her species apparently possessed natural empathic abilities that helped bridge the language gap. When Reese offered a portion of his nutrient rations, Elara inspected the food carefully before consuming small amounts. She then did something unexpected, placing her long-fingered hand on the small hydroponic garden Reese maintained. Before his astonished eyes, the struggling plants seemed to straighten and strengthen, their coloration becoming more vibrant. Elara swayed slightly with the effort, then gestured from the plants to Reese, a gift in return. That night, as a particularly violent chemical storm raged outside, Reese worked on reinforcing his perimeter defenses while Elara observed. She occasionally pointed to certain components or connections, making adjustments to his work that, Reese had to admit, improved the systems significantly. Her understanding of energy fields, in particular, seemed intuitive and advanced. During a brief lull in their work, Elara approached a small storage locker that contained Reese's few personal possessions. With a questioning gesture, she waited for his permission before opening it. Inside was a damaged translational device, standard issue for colonial exploratory teams, designed to help communication with newly discovered intelligent species. Elara examined it with evident recognition, then placed her hands over the device. Her tendrils shifted to a deep, concentrated purple as she closed her eyes. The device flickered to life for a moment, its circuits sparking before going dark again. Elara looked disappointed but determined. She pointed to her head, then to the device, then to her mouth. "You can fix it?" Reese asked. Elara made a wavering gesture, partially. With time. Over the next day, as Alara's strength continued to return, she worked intermittently on the damaged translator while Reese maintained vigilant watch over his sensors. There were disturbing signs, unusual energy signatures at the edge of his detection range, brief communication bursts that didn't match any colonial patterns. During a shared meal, Elara finally managed to coax enough functionality from the translator to begin rudimentary communication. The device still stuttered and often failed to find equivalents for alien concepts, but it allowed the first real conversation between them. "My people," Luminare, the mechanical voice translated. "Hunted by Chroma Syndicate. For our abilities." Reese leaned forward. "What abilities?" Elara gestured to the now thriving plants, then to the partially repaired translator. "Life, energy, manipulation, communication with systems." The translator crackled with static. "They experiment, harvest, sell." She pulled back the thin covering Reese had given her, revealing more of the surgical scars. "I escaped. Transport ship. Emergency pod. Crashed here. Hunters. Followed. Set traps." "How many hunters?" Reese asked. 5, 6. Elite. Dangerous." Alara's multifaceted eyes fixed on Reese with intensity. "You? In danger now. Because of me." As if to emphasize her point, the perimeter alarm suddenly blared to life. On the monitor, Reese watched a sleek, military-grade ship breaking through Xylos' toxic cloud cover, descending toward a landing zone less than 20 kilometers from the base. "They found us," Reese said unnecessarily. He began rapidly checking weapons and supplies. "We need to prepare." Elara stood, still weak but resolute. "I can help. Fight." Reese paused, studying the alien who, just days ago, had been a stranger, a responsibility he'd chosen to accept when every instinct told him to walk away. Now, they were allies in survival. Together, then, he said, they worked through the night, preparing the base for the inevitable assault. Reese deployed his limited supply of proximity mines at strategic approaches. He rigged secondary systems to fail spectacularly, creating diversions. Elara, meanwhile, focused on enhancing the base's energy systems, somehow channeling her species' natural abilities to strengthen shields and create disruptive fields around vulnerable points. By dawn, or what passed for dawn on Xylos, they had transformed the makeshift base into a fortress. Not impenetrable, but enough to give professional hunters pause. They didn't have to wait long. The first attack came from the air, a barrage of precision strikes from 2 combat drones targeting the base's power generators. The shield Elara had enhanced held barely. Reese returned fire with his modified mining laser, managing to clip one drone stabilizer. It spiraled away, damaged but not destroyed. "They're testing our defenses," Reese muttered, watching the thermal signatures of approaching ground forces on his monitor. 5 heavily armed figures advanced through the crystal forest, using the formations as cover. Their movements betrayed professional military training, coordinated, precise, patient. "These aren't ordinary bounty hunters," he said to Elara. "They're specialists." Alara's tendrils had shifted to a deep crimson. Through the translator, she explained, "Chroma, special forces, biotech hunters. They will not stop." The ground assault began with a series of coordinated explosions that rocked the base's eastern wall, Not enough to breach it, but sufficient to mask the approach of two hunters who reached the outer door. Reese triggered one of his prepared traps, releasing a stored pocket of Xylos' toxic atmosphere directly into their path. Their advanced suits protected them, but the momentary distraction allowed him to target one with his pulse rifle. The shot connected, sending the hunter sprawling. On the western approach, Illyra stood ready. When a hunter appeared around a crystal formation, she made a complex gesture with her long fingers. The crystals themselves seemed to respond, growing rapidly in jagged formations that trapped the surprised hunter. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it bought them time. For 20 minutes, they held their ground through a series of probing attacks. Then everything changed. A concentrated energy beam, far more powerful than anything the hunters had yet deployed, struck the base's northern section. Alarms blared as the outer wall began to melt. The ship, Reese realized. They're using the ship's main cannon. A second blast tore through the compromised section, vaporizing a quarter of Reese's living space and destroying most of his supplies. The pressure differential created a violent outgassing as Xylos' atmosphere began to invade. "We need to go," Reese shouted over the alarms, grabbing his emergency pack and a breather mask for Illyra. Through the maintenance tunnel, they escaped moments before a third blast reduced the base, Reese's home of 3 years, to slag and twisted metal. The maintenance tunnel, originally used by mining crews to access deep ice deposits, offered their only route away from the destruction. It emerged half a kilometer away, partially concealed by crystalline formations. As they exited, Reese caught sight of the hunting party regrouping. At their center stood a figure distinct from the others, taller, clad in an exoskeletal combat suit that enhanced strength and speed. "The leader, run," Reese urged, pulling Illyra toward a labyrinthine series of ice ravines. "I know these formations." "They don't." What followed was a desperate game of hunter and hunted. Reese led them through narrow passages where the deadly flora of Xylos provided natural barriers, across thin ice bridges that would collapse under the weight of the hunter's heavier gear, into caverns riddled with toxic gas pockets that he had mapped years ago. Illyra contributed her own knowledge, somehow sensing the movement of energy through Xylos' strange ecosystem. Twice, she warned Reese of ambushes seconds before they would have walked into them. Once, when 2 hunters had them cornered, she communed with the bioluminescent fungi that grew in the deepest ravines, causing them to release a blinding pulse of light that allowed their escape. But the hunters were relentless, professional, and better equipped. A glancing shot from an energy weapon caught Reese in the leg, searing through his suit and into the flesh beneath. Illyra helped him continue, supporting his weight despite her own exhaustion. After hours of pursuit, they found themselves trapped at the edge of an ancient mining pit, a vast chasm hundreds of meters deep, once used to extract rare minerals from Xylos' core. Behind them, the sounds of approaching hunters grew closer. "No way across," Reese gasped, leg throbbing with each heartbeat. "And I can't climb down with this leg." Illyra surveyed the chasm, then the approaching threat. Her tendrils shifted through colors rapidly. Calculation, decision. She turned to Reese and placed her hands on his wounded leg. Her eyes closed in concentration as her bioluminescent patterns intensified. A sensation like cool water flowing through his veins spread from her touch. The pain receded, not gone but dulled. Reese felt strength returning to the injured limb. "What did you do?" he asked in amazement. "Temporary healing. Energy transfer." Illyra swayed slightly, her own patterns dimmer. "Gave you my strength. Need it for what comes." Before Reese could respond, the first of the hunters emerged from the ravine they had just traversed. It was the leader, the exoskeleton humming with power as it enhanced every movement. Behind this imposing figure, 3 remaining hunters spread out in combat formation. The leader removed its helmet, revealing a face that might once have been human, but was now a complex integration of flesh and technology. When it spoke, the voice was artificially modulated for maximum psychological impact, deep, resonant, threatening. Subject Epsilon 17. It addressed Ilera. Your evasion has been impressive, but ultimately futile. The Chroma Syndicate has invested too much in your development to allow this loss. The leader's augmented eyes shifted to Reese. The human is irrelevant. Stand aside, and we will consider allowing you to live. Reese stepped in front of Ilera, his pulse rifle raised despite knowing it would be little match against the leader's advanced weaponry. She's not property. She's not going back. The leader's expression didn't change. It might have been incapable of expressing emotion. Unfortunate, but predictable. Humans develop irrational attachments quickly. It raised an arm, the exoskeleton reconfiguring to reveal an integrated weapon system. Kill the human. Subdue the subject. What happened next would forever remain etched in Reese's memory. As the hunters opened fire, Ilera moved in front of him with impossible speed. Her hands extended outward, fingers spread in complex patterns. The energy beams that should have incinerated them both seemed to warp around her outstretched hands, coalescing into a swirling vortex of power that she somehow, impossibly, contained. Her entire body now glowed with captured energy, patterns shifting faster than the eye could follow. With a cry that was part pain and part exultation, she redirected the accumulated power back toward the hunters. The resulting explosion turned the edge of the chasm into a maelstrom of shattered ice and vaporized crystal. Two of the hunters were caught directly in the blast and simply ceased to exist. Another was thrown backward, armor smoking, into the ravine. Only the leader remained standing, protected by some advanced shielding technology, though even its exoskeleton showed signs of damage. Ilera collapsed to her knees, the effort clearly having drained her beyond safe limits. Her bioluminescence had dimmed to almost nothing. The leader advanced, systems recalibrating. Impressive. Your capabilities have evolved beyond projected parameters. All the more reason you must be reclaimed. It raised its weapon again and staggered as Reese's pulse rifle shot struck a junction in the damaged exoskeleton. The leader turned toward Reese, contempt evident even on its partially mechanical face. Enough, it said, switching targets. Reese fired again, but this time the leader was ready. It dodged with enhanced reflexes and closed the distance between them in two augmented strides. A mechanical hand closed around Reese's throat, lifting him off the ground. You should have stayed in your hole, human, the leader said, tightening its grip. There was never any winning here. Through darkening vision, Reese saw Ilera rising behind the leader. Her form seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself bent around her. She placed her hands on the leader's exoskeleton, and her bioluminescent patterns surged bright once more. Not with her own energy this time, but with something drawn from deep within Xylos itself. The crystalline formations around them resonated in harmony, vibrating at increasing frequencies. The leader sensed the danger too late. It released Reese and spun toward Ilera, weapon powering up, but the exoskeleton was already failing, its systems overloaded by whatever energy Ilera was channeling through it. Sparks erupted from every joint. The leader's augmented eyes widened in what might have been the first genuine emotion it had felt in years, fear. What are you? It began. Ilera made one final gesture, and the stored energy released all at once. The leader's exoskeleton imploded, crushing the being inside with a sickening finality. Then silence, broken only by the constant howl of Xylos's toxic wind. Reese crawled to where Ilera had collapsed. Her body felt cold, her bioluminescence reduced to the faintest glimmer. For a terrifying moment, he thought she was gone. Then those multifaceted eyes opened, focusing on him with evident effort. Ilera, he said, cradling her slight form. Hold on. We'll find shelter. The translator, damaged in the battle, produced only fragments. Ship. Take. Their ship. Understanding dawned. The hunter ship would still be where they had landed it. If operational, it represented not just shelter, but escape. With renewed purpose, Reese lifted Ilera and began the difficult journey toward where they had last seen the ship descend. His injured leg threatened to give way with each step The temporary healing Alara had provided fading as her own energy diminished. But the alternative was death on Xylos's unforgiving surface. So he continued, one painful step after another. The storm was worsening, sheets of caustic precipitation reducing visibility to near zero. Reese navigated by memory and the occasional assistance of his damaged environmental suit's compass. Twice they had to shelter in ice caves as particularly violent squalls passed overhead. By the time they reached the landing site, both were at their limits. The ship, a sleek, predatory vessel clearly designed for pursuit and capture, stood on extended landing struts, its entry ramp open as if an invitation. Trap! Reese wondered aloud, too exhausted for caution. Alara's response was a weak gesture that he interpreted as uncertainty but necessity. They had no choice. The ship's interior was clinical and efficient, with minimal concessions to comfort. The bridge contained 5 crash couches, advanced navigational systems, and weapons controls that made Reese's military experience seem quaint by comparison. Most importantly, it offered shelter from Xylos's lethal atmosphere. Reese placed Alara gently on one of the couches before examining the ship's systems. Much of the technology was beyond his understanding, but the basic principles of space flight hadn't changed. Power, life support, propulsion, these fundamentals he could manage. As he worked to secure their temporary sanctuary, Alara drifted in and out of consciousness. Her natural healing abilities were evident. The worst of her injuries already showing improvement, but the energy expenditure had taken a toll that might require more than physical recovery. With the ship's environmental systems stabilized, Reese treated both their wounds using the vessel's surprisingly well-stocked medical bay. The treatments were designed for baseline humans, but they were better than nothing for Alara's alien physiology. As a makeshift meal of the ship's emergency rations revived them somewhat, Reese contemplated their situation. The immediate threat had been eliminated, but the Chroma Syndicate would eventually notice when their elite team failed to report back. More hunters would come, perhaps an entire battalion next time. We need to decide what to do, he said as Alara regained enough strength to sit up. The translator, partially repaired using components from a ship, rendered his words with reasonable accuracy. Alara's response was thoughtful, her tendrils now a contemplative violet. Options. Limited. Cannot return to my world. Chroma has. Presence there. Cannot go to human worlds. Would be. Detected. We could keep running, Reese suggested. This ship has impressive range. We could reach the outer rim, maybe find somewhere to disappear. Alara's multifaceted eyes studied him. You would? Come with me? Leave your isolation? The question gave Reese pause. His self-imposed exile on Xylos had been a choice born of guilt and failure, a punishment he had deemed necessary. The thought of returning to civilization, with all its complexities and responsibilities, filled him with a familiar dread. And yet, the past days had awakened something he thought dead. Purpose, connection, the will to protect something beyond himself. Yes, he said finally, I would come with you. They considered the ship's star charts, looking for potential safe havens. Yet each candidate destination presented its own dangers. Chroma influence, extradition treaties, hostile environments. As night fell on Xylos, the poisonous clouds darkening from gray to black, they sat in contemplative silence on the bridge, watching the endless chemical snowstorm through the viewports. Perhaps, Alara began hesitantly, we stay. Reese looked at her in surprise. Here, on Xylos. She nodded, tendrils shifting to a determined blue. Think, strategically. They will expect us to flee, to run far, not to remain where we were found. But the base is destroyed, Reese pointed out. And this planet is barely habitable even with specialized equipment. Have ship now. Better technology. Your knowledge of planet. My abilities with environment. Her multifaceted eyes gleamed with intensity. Could build, not just survival. Home. Reese found himself considering the proposal seriously. Xylos was harsh, yes, but he knew its dangers better than anyone alive. The abandoned mining facilities scattered across the planet contained resources that could be salvaged, and the ship itself was a treasure trove of advanced technology. More importantly, Xylos's very hostility offered a form of protection. Few would choose to pursue them into such an environment, and those who did would be at a significant disadvantage against opponents who knew the terrain intimately. It would be difficult, he said slowly. Dangerous. Alara made a sound that the translator didn't catch, but that Reese somehow understood was amusement. After what they had just survived, difficult and dangerous seemed like mild concerns. Together, she said simply, stronger. There was wisdom in her proposal. And something else, the recognition that neither of them truly had anywhere else to go. They were both outcasts, survivors, beings who had lost their original place in the universe. Perhaps they could create a new one. Over the following weeks, they established a new base far from the ruins of Reese's original shelter. They chose a network of natural caverns in a mountain range that offered protection from Xylos's storms while providing multiple escape routes if needed. Using the ship's advanced fabrication systems, they created reinforced habitat structures that merged seamlessly with the natural formations. Alara's connection to Xylos's ecosystem proved invaluable. She could sense dangerous weather patterns before they formed, communicate with certain indigenous life forms, and even accelerate the growth of the few edible plants that could be adapted to their needs. Her abilities seemed to strengthen the longer she remained on the planet, as if Xylos itself welcomed her. Reese contributed his engineering expertise and practical knowledge of survival in hostile environments. Together, they turned what should have been a desperate struggle into something approaching stability. The ship became their mobile outpost, carefully concealed but maintained in constant readiness. They used it sparingly, making short reconnaissance flights to salvage resources from abandoned mining sites and to establish a network of early warning systems across the planet's surface. They expected pursuit, prepared for it daily, but as months passed with no sign of Chroma forces, they allowed themselves cautious optimism. Perhaps the lost team had been written off as casualties of Xylos's hostile environment. Perhaps the Syndicate had deemed the cost of a larger operation too high for the recovery of a single escape specimen. Or perhaps they were simply biding their time, gathering intelligence before striking again. Whatever the truth, Reese and Alara used the reprieve to strengthen their position and deepen their bond. Communication between them improved as Alara's mastery of the repaired translator increased. They shared their histories. Reese's failed rescue mission that had cost the lives of his family and team, Alara's capture from her homeworld, and subsequent years as an experimental subject in Chroma laboratories. They taught each other skills, Reese learning the basics of Alara's energy manipulation techniques, Alara absorbing his knowledge of human technology and tactical thinking. Their differences complemented each other in ways neither could have anticipated. And somewhere along the way, what had begun as an alliance of necessity transformed into something deeper. Not quite translatable into human terms of friendship or romance, but a connection based on mutual respect, trust, and eventually a form of love that transcended species barriers. One evening, as they stood at the entrance to their cavern home, watching a rare, clear night reveal Xylos's 3 moons, Alara spoke of a concept from her culture. My people have word. Xanaverii means souls who find each other across void, who create home where no home should be. Reese considered this. Soulmates, he suggested. Similar, but more chosen than fated. 2 beings who decide to be each other's sanctuary. They watched the toxic clouds gradually obscure the moons again, returning Xylos to its perpetual twilight. The moment felt significant, an acknowledgement of what they had built together in this most unlikely of places. Xanaverii, Reese repeated, tasting the alien word. I like that. Their peaceful existence, however, proved as fragile as Xylos's brief moments of clarity. 6 months after their escape from the hunters, the proximity alarms they had scattered across the planet's surface began triggering in sequence. Not random environmental activations, but a methodical pattern indicating systematic sweeps. The Chroma Syndicate had returned. 3 ships, Reese reported grimly, analyzing the sensor data in their command center. Bigger than the Hunter vessel. Military grade. Alara stood beside him, her tendrils a solemn gray. They sent. Proper retrieval force this time. Not hunters. Soldiers. The scans revealed dropships deploying at strategic points across Xylos' surface, locations that provided optimal coverage of the planet's habitable zones. Each carried squads of heavily armed personnel and advanced detection equipment. They're being thorough, Reese observed, setting up a net rather than chasing blindly. They had prepared for this possibility, establishing fallback positions and emergency protocols. Their primary base remained hidden, shielded by natural formations and Alara's manipulation of the surrounding biological systems to mask their energy signature. But with so many search teams, detection was inevitable given enough time. We have options, Reese said, bringing up a holographic map of the planet's surface. We can use the ship, break atmosphere, try to outrun them to another system. High risk, Alara countered. Their vessels, faster, better armed, would detect launch immediately. We could split up, Reese suggested reluctantly. Create diversions. Make them chase shadows. Alara's response was immediate, her tendrils flashing a decisive crimson. No, together or not at all. She approached the holographic display, studying the deployment pattern of the chroma forces. After a moment of consideration, she pointed to a location several hundred kilometers from their current position. Here, old mining complex, central processing facility. Reese zoomed in on the area, a massive industrial complex built into the side of an ice mountain, abandoned during the hasty evacuation following the biological disaster that had transformed Xylos decades ago. What about it? He asked. Contains quantum communication array, planet-wide broadcast capability. Alara's eyes gleamed with determination. And prototype terraforming equipment. Understanding dawned. You want to send a message? To whom? Everyone, Alara said simply. Chroma's power comes from secrecy. Their experiments, their hunts, hidden from galactic community. If exposed, you want to make yourself too public to disappear, Reese finished. Use their own tactics against them. The plan was audacious and dangerous. The facility would be heavily degraded after years of exposure to Xylos' corrosive atmosphere. Restoring power and functionality to the broadcast array would be challenging enough under ideal conditions, let alone while evading chroma forces. And reaching the facility would mean traversing hundreds of kilometers of hostile terrain with search teams actively hunting them. But the alternative was a lifetime of running or worse. They packed essential supplies and equipment into their ship, preparing for what might be their final mission together. Before departing, Alara spent time in communion with the crystalline formations that had become part of their home, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in complex sequences as she interfaced with Xylos' strange ecosystem. What are you doing? Reese asked when she finally rejoined him. Asking for help? She replied, her expression solemn but hopeful. They launched under cover of one of Xylos' frequent chemical storms, flying low to avoid detection. Rather than taking a direct route to the mining complex, they followed deep ravines and mountain shadows, occasionally setting down to wait out periods when orbital scans would be most effective. The journey took 3 days of tense, careful progress. Twice they narrowly avoided chroma patrols. Once they were forced to land and wait out a particularly violent storm that even their advanced ship struggled to navigate. On the 4th day, they reached the abandoned processing facility, a colossal structure of corroded metal and cracked plascrete, half buried in accumulated ice and chemical precipitate. They concealed their ship in a collapsed storage hangar and proceeded on foot, carrying only what they could manage while maintaining mobility. The facility's interior was a maze of darkened corridors, collapsed ceilings, and equipment frozen in time at the moment of abandonment. Emergency lighting still functioned in some sections, powered by ancient radioisotope generators designed to last centuries. Following schematics Reese had salvaged from his early exploration of Xylos' mining sites, they made their way toward the central control hub. The broadcasting equipment would be there, along with the terraforming control systems. "What exactly is your plan with the terraforming equipment?" Reese asked as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of collapsed walkway. "Xylos is balanced now. Toxic but stable," Ilera explained. "Terraforming systems were designed to purge atmosphere, create violent reaction. If activated, would generate electromagnetic pulse across planet. Temporarily disable chroma technology. And give us the window we need to broadcast," Reese nodded. "Clever." What Ilera didn't mention, what Reese suspected but didn't voice, was that such a purge would also destabilize the delicate ecosystem she had communed with. The damage might be temporary or permanent. Either way, it represented a sacrifice. They reached the central hub to find it in better condition than expected. Sealed environmental doors had protected much of the equipment from the worst effects of Xylos' atmosphere. Reese immediately set to work on the broadcast array, while Ilera began the complex process of reactivating the terraforming controls. Hours passed in focused work. Outside, Xylos' perpetual twilight darkened to night. Their sensors warned of increased chroma activity, the search patterns tightening as teams methodically eliminated sectors of the planet. "They're closing in," Reese reported grimly, hands never pausing in their work on the communication system. "We've got maybe 3 hours before they reach this sector." Ilera acknowledged with a solemn nod, her tendrils shifting in concentration as she interfaced directly with the terraforming computer, bypassing damaged sections through her unique abilities. They completed the preparations with barely an hour to spare. The broadcast system hummed with restored power, ready to send Ilera's message, and evidence of Chroma's atrocities, collected from the Hunter ship's databases, to every colonial world and independent station within 50 light-years. The terraforming trigger was also prepared, requiring only final activation from a separate control room, due to the original safety protocols. "I'll handle the terraforming sequence," Reese said, checking his weapon. "You prepare the broadcast. When the pulse hits, you'll have maybe 2 minutes before their systems adapt and restore functionality." Ilera caught his arm before he could leave. "Danger in control room. Exposed to elements. Your suit. Not sufficient protection for extended period." Reese met her multifaceted eyes. "I know, but I'm coming back. Just be ready." Their parting was brief, a touch of hands, a meeting of eyes that conveyed what words could not. Then Reese was moving through the facility's corridors toward the external control center where the terraforming sequence had to be manually initiated. The night air of Xylos hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, corrosive and bitter cold despite his environmental suit. The control center stood 50 meters away across an exposed platform, its systems independent to prevent catastrophic failures in the main facility. He had covered half the distance when a proximity alarm on his wrist pinged urgently. Overhead, a chroma dropship pierced the toxic clouds, searchlights sweeping the facility grounds. They had arrived earlier than expected. Reese sprinted for the control center as the first shots sizzled past him. The dropship deployed troops in exoskeletal combat suits, similar to those worn by the Hunter team, but more numerous and even more heavily armed. Reaching the control room, Reese sealed the door behind him and began the activation sequence. The terraforming system was never designed for the purpose they were repurposing it for. It required overriding multiple safety protocols, bypassing fail-safes. Outside, Chroma forces approached methodically, their weapons trained on the control center. They didn't fire immediately. Likely they had detected Ilera's presence in the main facility and wanted to capture both targets alive, if possible. Reese worked feverishly, aware of his suit's integrity declining under Xylos' assault. Warning indicators flashed. Filter capacity at 60%, 45%. The exterior atmosphere was eating through his protections faster than anticipated. The final sequence required a manual override at 3 separate stations. Reese moved between them, breath coming in harsh gasps as his suit struggled to maintain breathable air. The Chroma forces reached the door, bringing heavy cutting equipment to bear on the sealed entrance. Reese heard the shriek of metal as they began to force their way in. With seconds to spare, he completed the final override. The terraforming system awakened fully, ancient machinery humming to life throughout the facility and at similar installations across the planet's surface. Emergency warnings blared as the system recognized the unsafe configuration, but it was too late to stop the sequence. Reese activated his communicator. "Alara, it's done. Broadcast now." The response was lost as the system reached critical activation. A blinding light erupted from emitters across the facility, spreading outward in a rapidly expanding wave. The pulse passed through everything, structures, vehicles, living tissue, but its effect on electronic systems was devastating. The chroma forces at the door suddenly went rigid as their exoskeletons failed. The dropship overhead wobbled, its engines sputtering before it made an emergency landing. Reese's own systems weren't spared. His suit's life support faltered, leaving him exposed to Xylos' toxic atmosphere. He staggered toward the door, each breath burning in his lungs despite the emergency breather he activated. His vision blurred as he forced his way past the immobilized chroma soldiers, their advanced systems temporarily reduced to useless metal encasing struggling occupants. The 100-meter journey back to the main facility entrance became a nightmare of pain and determination. He was vaguely aware of alarms still sounding, of strange atmospheric effects as the terraforming pulse continued to spread across Xylos. The toxic clouds above swirled in unnatural patterns, briefly parting to reveal the stars beyond. Reese collapsed at the main entrance, no longer able to draw sufficient oxygen. His last conscious thought was of Alara, wondering if she had succeeded, if their desperate gamble had been worth the price. He awoke to the sensation of cool energy flowing through his body, a familiar feeling. Alara knelt beside him, her hands on his chest, her bioluminescence pulsing strongly as she channeled her healing abilities into him. They were in their ship, the familiar hum of its systems indicating they were in flight. "You came for me." Reese managed his voice rough. "Always," Alara replied simply, her tendrils a warm gold of relief and affection. As his strength gradually returned, she explained what had happened. The broadcast had gone out successfully, Chroma's secret operations exposed to every colonial authority and independent world in the sector. The evidence was damning. Records of illegal experimentation, biological warfare, slavery of sentient species. The terraforming pulse had done more than expected. It had triggered a cascade effect in Xylos' atmosphere, a purification process that the original engineers could never have anticipated. The planet's ecosystem, already resilient and adaptive, was absorbing and transforming the changes in unexpected ways. Xylos, healing itself, Alara said with wonder. Becoming something new. They had escaped during the confusion, retrieving their ship before chroma forces could recover. Now they were in orbit, watching the transformation below and considering their next move. "The Syndicate will be in chaos," Reese noted, "but they're still dangerous. They'll want revenge." "Yes," Alara agreed, "but no longer hunting just us. Now hunted themselves. By authorities, by rivals sensing weakness." She manipulated the ship's controls, bringing up a star chart. "We have choices now. Places that might welcome us, offer protection in exchange for knowledge." Reese studied the possibilities: independent worlds, research outposts, even a few colonial territories where Chroma's influence had been minimal. Places where Alara's unique abilities and knowledge would be valued rather than exploited, where Reese's engineering and survival skills could contribute to something constructive. Places where two beings from entirely different worlds might build a life together. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. Alara's tendrils shifted through thoughtful colors before settling on a determined blue. She indicated a system near the edge of explored space, a developing colony known for its scientific outpost and progressive policies toward non-human species. "There," she said. "New beginning." Reese programmed the coordinates, and their ship turned away from Xylos, accelerating toward the stars. Through the viewport, They watched as the planet slowly receded, its toxic clouds now shot through with unexpected hints of blue. The first signs of a transformation that might, given time, make it truly habitable. Xanaverii, Reese said softly. Yes, Alaire agreed her, multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. Souls who find each other across the void, who create home where no home should be. The ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain future, but one they would face together. No longer predator and prey, hunter and hunted, but partners in survival, in life, in hope.